Well, we got some friends here. We've got Roger from Westchester. We've got Jeff from Radnor. I have been down here. I am a Massachusetts resident and native of suburban Boston. I am a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania. They established this thing in 1972. I was a sophomore at Penn in 1972. For some reason, Mike, I missed the soccer boom. My gosh, my childhood went empty. I never played soccer at all. Imagine that. And I was in lily white suburbia in Boston. Jeez. By the way, our soccer club in my hometown got started right around the same time, 1972. Again, I was a sophomore in college, obsessed with basketball and academics every now and then at good old University of Pennsylvania. All right, folks, to liven this up, I'm going to switch it around a bit. We've talked about soccer. Obviously, they're my host tonight. But I want to talk about another sport, which I've had a love-hate relationship for 50 years with. It is down here, and my God, they used to practice at the rink. Class of 23 rink down at Penn, the Philadelphia Flyers. Hockey. I'm a Bostonian, folks, and I grew up with plenty of hockey. In fact, when I was in high school outside of Boston, it was the great years of Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito in those big bad Boston Bruins. And I got to come down here to Penn, and we got the big bad Philadelphia Flyers. I was a street hockey child, played a lot of that, much more than I ever played basketball, and I've always followed hockey because I grew up in Boston. This is what we do. We're one of the 3 M states, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota. Big time hockey. So I've always had the love-hate relationship. I've loved the sport. If you've ever seen it live, there may be no better sport to watch than hockey. It is fast, it is furious, and it is physical, to be sure. However, because I started speaking on the In the World of Youth Sports 22 years ago, and my primary geography at that time was Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Vermont and Maine, up where I lived, I of course knew I was going to run into a lot of hockey folks. But even I was surprised, because probably in 1993 or 4, this is 20 years ago now, I was doing one of my community talks, and after the talk was over, up came a young man and a young woman. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, they look like teenagers. What are they doing here? So he came up, introduced himself. His name was John. I don't remember his fiance's name. They were about to be married. And John, I asked him right away, I said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 25. I said, do you have kids? He said, no, we're about to get married and blah, blah, blah. I said, well, what brings you to see me? You don't have kids yet, you're not in sports. He said, well, I read that you were coming to this town, and by the way, this was in central Massachusetts. And he said, I figured I could meet with you afterwards and tell you my story. I said, please do. He said, I am the greatest hockey player in the history of this town. First thing he said. I said, okay, someone had to be. I guess it was him. So, I said, tell me how you got started. He said, I got started at 3 or 4 in the classical, what they call learn to skate programs. And he said, by the time I was 6 in first grade, my dad already knew that I was something special. In fact, he said, I was already the least worst player. One of my favorite phrases for those who've heard me speak before. So at 6 years old, I was already playing on a big rink, which is incredibly stupid. It's like your 6-year-olds playing on 110 by 70-yard fields. So I was already on the move. Every weekend, a different rink in a different town, in a different county, in a different state. Well, time went on, and I found myself, I'm 13 years old, 7th grade. He said, I turned around and looked in the mirror one day, and I said, John, you've been playing hockey for 10 years. Imagine being 13 years old, already played 10 years of hockey. And the second thing he said is, I hate hockey. 13. Best in town, best in the county, who knows how good he was. He said, however, there was one person I certainly couldn't tell that I hated hockey, and that person was my dad. He, of course, already had me slated for the NHL. So, rather than go to one of these prep schools or one of these Catholic schools, which are notorious for good hockey up in my area, now they've got juniors and seniors and who the hell knows what else, it's unbelievable. the world. I decided to stay home and play at my local high school here in this town. And he said, yes, I became the best high school player this town's ever known. All I could think of when I was going through high school was to play with my buddies here at this high school, finish off, and never play hockey again. He was just going to play through high school. I said I got into college. My dad was furious that I never wanted to take my hockey, didn't talk to me for weeks, if not months. But I decided I wanted to go to college and just be a college student. Graduated with a degree in accounting, went and got his CPA. He's 25 years old, talking to me that night. He says, Bob, guess what I recently took up? I said, hockey. He said, right. Me and a bunch of buddies get together a couple times a week, local rink, no slap shots, no checking. We just go play. Bob, it's the kind of hockey I should have been playing when I was 9 years old. However, when I was 9 years old, my dad and everybody else had me on the NHL track. He looks at me and said, Bob, I've come to the determination at age 25 about hockey. It stole my childhood. Ooh. Imagine waking up at 25 years old and admitting to yourself that a sport stole your childhood. Well, once I picked myself up off the floor, I decided to ask him a couple questions. I said, John, when, if, are you going to have the talk with your dad about your childhood and hockey? He said, Bob, not yet. It's still too raw. He said, second thing, when you guys get married, if you guys want, I hope you have kids. What the hell are you going to do with them when it comes to them playing sports? You know what he said? Bob, they can play anything, everything, or nothing. I could care less, as long as they're happy and healthy. I looked at him and I said, you remember what you just told me. The talk with your dad's going to be really difficult, but what you just expressed to me is the way you should treat those kids, future kids of yours. In a 22-year speaking career of 1,200 plus talks, that is still maybe the most impressionable anecdote I can tell, and I hardly tell it at all anymore. I deal in a world of course, adult expectations. That has certainly been plowed tonight. I also live in a world of kids' expectations. That, to me, is far more important. Sometimes I wish I could get rid of the adults. Just get rid of them. All of you guys. Send you back to doing adult things, whatever the hell that is. I've got an idea. Over 35 soccer leagues. Go play yourself. Better yet, bring your 10-year-olds around, let them yell and scream at you. I'd love to see that. That would be great. Flip the script. Because if I got rid of you, very simply, you would have, or your kids would have, Bob Bigelow's childhood. That was my childhood. 98.6% of all my athletic activities prior to high school, prior to 14 years old, were with other kids, no adults, apple orchards, backyards, fields, whatever. No adults. Me and a whole bunch of other kids trying to figure it out. And that we did. There could have been kids 2 years younger than me, there could have been kids 3 years older. Could have been siblings, could have been my siblings' friends. We collected day after day somewhere and figured out something to play. Was it a game called hockey? Was it a game called basketball? Was it a game called soccer or kick the can? Maybe all the above. It was everything. You may find this hard to believe. You are looking at one of fewer than 1,000 first-round draft picks in the history of the NBA, and a very, very fine career down the street at Penn for Chuck Daly. I never played basketball till I was 14 years old. I was a freshman in high school. The first time I ever put on a uniform, first time a human being dressed like a zebra blew a whistle. First time a scoreboard lit up in a gym, I was 14 years old. 7 years later, I was the number 13 pick in the country, in the world. And we only drafted Americans back then. I tell that to kids and adults today, and they're like, that's shocking. How could you get such a late start? Folks, it ain't late. What's early this day is all the competitions, and all the tournaments, and all the U3 teams. That's what's early. I'll tell you what hasn't changed in 30, 40, 50, 60 years in this country. The growth and development of human beings called kids. That's what hasn't changed. What has changed is we now cut 7 and 8-year-olds, as Mike said, which to me is the damnedest stupid thing going. None of them can play a freaking lick. They're 8 years old. They all suck. Yet someone's going to make the determination that some suck less than others. Are you serious? You know how many 6th grade basketball players I've seen in my life? The number is between 1 and 2 gazillion. You know how many of them can play the game? None. They all stink. Why? Because they're 6th grade basketball players. They're supposed to stink. As a friend of mine in Texas says, what is there that any 10-year-old can do well? I've got one thing, and I've had 2 of them. They whine really well. World-class whiners, the Bigelow children. I am often stupefied when I read and hear about this stuff, that we are comparing and contrasting children's athletic abilities while they're still in elementary school, and none of them can play a lick. The reason we do this is because for some odd reason, we have to take the less worse, I never say better, and we've got to go play someone else's less worse for the battle of the less worse trophy at the end of the weekend. Great. Fabulous. Well, folks, I'm going to introduce you to something new. And I will be very interested in this crowd to see if anybody knows what this is. This will be curious. Mike, I hope you do. The 4 letters, especially the doctors, LTAD. Anybody want to guess? Mike is muttering it under his breath here. He knows. Anybody ever heard of this? Dr. Brady? Time to study up, my friend. Long-term athlete development. With all your smartphones, you can Google the following name. It must be John Doe in Hungarian. I-S-T-V-A-N. That's his first name. B-A-L-Y-I. That's his last name. István Balyi. A guy from Budapest who for the last 20 years has lived in British Columbia. He is the patron saint and the father of LTAD. Without getting into all the explanation and ramifications of LTAD, I'm going to give it to you straight. This is what it is. And by the way, every other country in the world that practices athletics on a more developed scale, including our fine cousins to the north of the border, Canadians. Other than hockey, they're lost hope there. Everybody's practicing this except one rather large country that we're sitting in tonight. The USOC, United States Olympic Committee, knows about it. It's getting there at a glacial pace, folks. My guess is within 5 to 10 years, it may hit the tipping point, and we'll all know about it. Long-term athlete development. Anybody remember the Ernest and Julio Gallo wine commercials from the 80s? Anybody remember? We will sell no wine before it's time, especially if it's in a box. You can't sell it too much. Anyways, LTAD. We will get rid of no athletes from our system until 16 or 17 years old. That's what it is, folks. I spent a lovely week in Wellington, New Zealand, 6 or 7 years ago. One of the nice things about doing what I'm doing is every now and then other countries call for some American basketball player to teach them stuff. Don't know what the heck I know, but I'd be glad to take trips to New Zealand anytime. So, I got off the stage after my keynote to 700 youth sports coaches from the 2 islands of New Zealand. The first person that approached me after my talk was the New Zealand men's Olympic basketball coach, who, by the way, was Croatian, but he had moved to New Zealand about 15 years before. His name was Nenad, N-E-N-A-D. He said, "Bob, wonderful speech." He said, "Do you know in your country that if you cut 95% of 8th grade boys basketball players in your country, it doesn't matter, because you're still going to get LeBron James and Kobe Bryant?" I said, "You're absolutely right, Nenad." He said, "Do you know what happens here in New Zealand if I cut 95% of our 8th grade 13-year-old basketball players?" I said, "Yeah, I know what happens. You don't have a team that can compete at the U16, U18 world class level. You're not even close." He said, "Bob, the population of our 2 islands here in New Zealand is 4 million, which doesn't even get to the size of Greater Philadelphia." He said, "We keep everybody until 20 years old because we don't know. It tends to be a tall person sport, as I well know, and tall people tend to mature and coordinate later than smaller people, who tend to have lower center of gravity, and they get a little more coordinated early. I have to wait for some of these kids to grow up. And you know what? Some of them are the best basketball players we've ever had in New Zealand. And quite a few of them weren't that great shakes at 15 years old." He said, "Bob, in your country, you can afford to cut those kids, and you're still going to get Kobe and LeBron." I said, "Yeah, because Nenad, here in America, not just in basketball, we do everything on volume. My God, we're a country of 315 million people. How many of these people play basketball and soccer? Gazillions. So what we cut? So what we tell 8-year-olds to take a hike? We don't want you playing soccer anymore. We've still got another gazillion in the pipeline until we cut them again at 10 or 13 or whatever. We're still going to get plenty of." Is it a system that's peculiar to America? Perhaps. Is it a system I detest? You bet. Because I do know something that's inarguable. Athletic ability does not come till after puberty. It doesn't come before puberty. Your child's athletic ability prior to puberty is a meaningless indicator of that same child's athletic ability post-puberty, with a couple of exceptions that he already mentioned. By the way, gymnasts, girls, not boys. Figure skaters, girls, not boys. Anybody want to guess the percentage of child figure skaters, girls, and child girl gymnasts out of the 40 million kids who are playing organized sport between age 3 and 14 in this country? What percentage are girl figure skaters and girl gymnasts? 0.005. I like that number. We'll go with that. 0.005. Folks, everything else is late. Don't give me hockey. Don't give me soccer. Please don't give me basketball. So, 1972. A good year, I think. I barely remember it. I was a sophomore in college. I didn't know soccer from a chair. Never had a chance to play it. But 16, 17 years later, in the late 80s, when I started looking at youth sports in America, high on my list, right at the top, was finding out about this GD game called soccer. Because somehow it eluded me as a kid. But by the time the late 80s came around, it was everywhere. Youth soccer in the 70s was an unbelievable, what I call Caucasian uprising in this country. By the way, it was one of 2 Caucasian uprisings. Anybody know the other one? Disco. Thank heavens that sort of fell by the wayside. Youth soccer did not. It kept going and going and going. So by the time I got to 1988, 1990, and I started looking at youth sports in America, it was one very big elephant in the room, youth soccer. One that I had avoided because, of course, I grew up as a kid in the 60s. So one of the first things I did when I was studying youth sports is I went to guys like Mike Barr. I think I told you this in our first conversation. Mike wasn't around. I would have asked him the question. I didn't know about him until 6 months ago. But I did ask 3 people I'm sure he knows in the business. 3 guys up in Massachusetts who had made quite a name for themselves in youth soccer the prior 10, 15, 20 years. And I was asking them all sorts of questions. The X's and O's and the diamonds and all that stuff, I didn't really care about. I could figure that out in due time. But I was really interested in child development in the game of soccer. So all 3 of those guys, independently, they weren't together, I asked the following question. Pose the scenario. Here it is. Mr. Soccer Expert, you have 2 11-year-olds. One has never played the game of soccer. He or she's 11. They've been doing other things, they just haven't gotten around to playing soccer. The other 11-year-old's been playing since age 6, 5 years. Now I realize the one who's been playing since age 6 is going to be a better soccer player now at 11 than the 11-year-old who hasn't played. But the 11-year-old who hasn't played now has taken an interest in the game. And we are going to nurture him or her. We're going to get him or her over the rough spots, get him into the game, get him passionate, get him liking it, etc. Here was my question to all 3 of them. At what age will the soccer player who didn't play till age 11 catch up in skills and ability to the soccer player who started playing at age 6? In other words, a 5-year head start. Anybody want to guess what my soccer experts? By the way, I had already studied this, and they absolutely corroborated what I already knew. 2 of them said 2 years. 1 of them said 3 years. 13 or 14. By the way, for you basketball folks, jack that up 3 more years. 14 to 17. Basketball is a 3-year harder sport to play than soccer. Did I explain this to you? Oh, you wait till afterwards. We'll get a good one on this. All right. So, armed and dangerous with that kind of knowledge, I went out to the soccer people. Thank heavens, it was still only 1992, 93, 94. We weren't quite as crazy then as we are now, as been expressed in earlier talks tonight. I knew it because of that one word, puberty. It makes a difference, folks. And puberty is really a funny thing, because in girls, it can hit at 9 or 10. In boys, it can hit from 15 to 16. In the 7 years between ages 9 and 15, that's 7, not 6, 7 birth years, there can be a 6-year developmental maturational difference in kids literally the same chronological age. I've seen 13-year-old boys with a little bit of hair in their chin and hair in their legs. They look 16. Their next door neighbor, another 13-year-old boy in the same day, looks 10. Look at the difference between girls and boys. Anybody here ever witnessed a middle school dance? A friend of mine, a middle school principal, once told me, I'm in charge of a school of 6-foot girls and 4-foot boys. I kind of like that explanation. Look at these kids, going through those wacky hormonal periods. And we're going to define who the future athletes are in the 4-foot 6th graders, boys. Right. As I always ask the question, gee, can't we let them grow up a bit? Just a bit. Just a bit. None. Because we've got U8 teams to pick. We've got U10 teams to pick. And we've got to go play in a tournament in 3 weeks. We've got to go do this. Pediatric nonsense. This is what organized youth sports in this country has become. We have forgotten the raw material called a kid. Folks, if you put 20 soccer players out there in any community in this country at age 8, I'm going to tell you what those 20 are going to have. 2 of them, 1/10, are going to be less worse. 2 of them, 1/10 on the other side, are going to be worse. Everybody else is under the bell, in the middle. the way it is, or take 100, or take 1,000. It doesn't matter. And they all stink anyways. But somehow we've got to develop a team, a bunch of kids who are going to be better than the other kids, and then they're going to go to a tournament and we're going to prove they're better than those other kids. All in, as Mike said, the race to nowhere. Maybe we should define it, Mike, as the race to prepubescent nowhere. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe that's what it is. By the way, the studies have been done for 30 years. Age 5 to 19, which takes us from kindergarten all the way through high school. What is the number one reason that kids play sports? With a bullet, nothing else comes close. It's a hard word, folks, but rather amorphous. Fun. Gee, whatever happened to that? F-U-N. By the way, does anybody know the real crux of fun? This will be revelatory for all of them. Playing time. Believe it or not, kids play sports to play. I bet that shocks everybody. Anybody know what number 2 is? Get better, develop skills. Number 3, run around, activity. Number 4, socialization. Make friends, be friends, keep friends. Anybody want to guess where winning falls on this august list of priorities with kids at these ages? Ages 5 to 12, winning comes in number 12. At 12 to 19, it jumps all the way up to number 8. And I've seen dozens of high school studies, and I've seen winning anywhere from 1 to 10. Varsity, JV, freshmen, boys, girls, context, variables, questions, yada, yada, yada. You can plan on this. As the child ages, winning does become a more important part of the process. However, tempering that is this. Lots of studies, tens of thousands of kids at these ages have asked the following question. Here it is. Hey kid, what would you rather do? Play every moment, minute, or play on a team that loses every game, goes winless, or would you rather play no plays, no minutes, no moments on a team that goes undefeated, wins every game? Anybody want to guess what the vast majority of kids answered? Children want to play, folks. There is one thing they could care less about: how you and me coach. I have coached 6 gazillion kids the last 40 plus years of my life. I have never had one come up to me after a game and say, gee, Mr. Bigelow, you really coach well. But they could care less about my lovely coaching ability. They do, however, get enthused about their own playing ability, which is the way it should be, egocentric. I like that. But, with that said, you ask any kid during one of these contests, even if they're 5 or 6, hey kid, do you want to win this game? I doubt they're going to say, you know, Mr. Bigelow, today I prefer to lose. Yeah, sure I want to win. But you ask them afterwards, why did they play the game? What did they like? Oh, I only play the game to win. Are you kidding me? You want to know the difference between winning and losing with kids after a game? Hey Dad, we won. Let's go to McDonald's. Hey Dad, we lost. Let's go to McDonald's. That's the difference. They've got 7,000 more games to play in the next 6 weeks. You think this one game they just lost they really care about? No, not at all. In fact, I had a dad tell me this when my oldest boy, who's now 26, was like 13. They were playing a baseball game. It was part of a doubleheader, and I think the next day they were going to play another doubleheader. They have already played because up in Massachusetts, just like down here, the weather stinks, so you end up with a lot of doubleheaders in May, when the weather hopefully gets better. So this was part of one of those, 8 games and 7-day schedules. And our kids lost a game. Okay, they lost a game. Lasted the 7th or whatever from school. They had another game going already. And one of the dads was like, how come they're not more pissed? What would you expect? They got a gazillion of these games. They've already played a gazillion soccer games, they're playing a gazillion baseball games, they got basketball games in the winter, yada, yada, yada. Hey, believe me, folks, every game has a winner and loser. If kids really were mad and they didn't like sports because they lost, we would have far fewer than 40 million of them between age 3 and 14 playing these silly games. If it really mattered, there's got to be something else driving the bus. It ain't winning and losing. It's all that other fun stuff that I mentioned before. That's why they show up and play. Sure, they want to win. They don't want to lose. But even kids get this better than adults. We're going to win some, we're going to lose some. No one goes undefeated through life. It's a very rare bird. So, what do we get to? Hockey, basketball, soccer, softball, baseball, the major ones. And lacrosse is now coming on the outside lane. It's getting there. They're coming. Interesting story to tell. And I haven't told this often, but it fits because it's under my roof. My boy David is 26, as I told a couple of you. He lives down in Center City, Philadelphia, works for Comcast, University of Delaware grad. He's having a blast because, as he told me, there's a tavern on every corner in Center City, Philadelphia. Why would you not have a blast? Anyhow, my 21-year-old graduates from UMass Amherst a week from Friday. Well, my wife is 5'2" and a former backstroker at Penn State, and she is now a 38-year college swimming coach and has been the coach at Tufts for the last 32 years. So, somehow in a mix of backstroking genes and jump shooting genes, we got two Bigelow boys. My oldest son's best game was lacrosse, and my younger son's best game he thought was going to be soccer. He loves this game. He thinks this is great. Played varsity for 2 years at our local high school, soccer. However, that did not become his best sport. 7 years ago, last month, Stephen, now a senior in college, was a freshman at my old high school where we live, Winchester High School. Well, in Massachusetts, the opening day of spring sports is the third Monday in March. And in my hometown, we have world-class high school tennis. My God, the girls and the boys have won like 40 state titles between them the last 30 years. So my son, who plays tennis at least 3 times a year, thought that he should try out for the tennis team and make it. So that's what he did as a freshman. He tried out that third Monday. He promptly got cut. No surprise, he plays 3 times a year, as opposed to the other kids who play 300 times a year. So Tuesday, he comes home the next day, having been cut from the tennis team, and I'm upstairs in my office, and I hear him come in, and after a phone call, I go downstairs, and there is my lovely 5'11", 40-pound freshman in high school watching TV. I said, Stephen, we have talked about this. I would rather you not sit on that couch the next 10 weeks on spring afternoons. I'd rather have you do something athletically. And he said, well, Dad, I already got cut from the tennis team. I said, yeah, and I know a team that doesn't cut kids. He said, well, Dad, we've been through track and field. Typical 14-year-old. Track and field are for nerds. 14-year-old boy, my mouthy son. I said, Stephen, I don't really care. So what I did that night is I called the track coaches, both good friends, known them for years. And I told them, I don't really care what you do with them, make them break the long jump pit for all I care. I just don't want them home the next 10 weeks in the afternoon. So, he didn't come home the next few days. My God, he could have been smoking pot under a bridge somewhere. At least he didn't come home. So, 3 weeks later is the first track meet. Now in our town, we have one now, but 7 years ago we did not have a track. It had been condemned about 10 years earlier. So all the track meets were on the road, and they were co-ed, like 200 girls and boys. So I go up to a neighboring community about 5 miles away to the track meet. Fortunately, we had a somewhat lovely spring day in Massachusetts, and an April day. And I get to the football stadium where the track's around the football field, and I can't find my son. So I asked the coach, I said, have you seen Steven? And he said, yeah, look out there at the 50-yard line. And there is my 14-year-old, 5'11", 40-pound son in the middle chatting with 6 freshman girls. I think he looked at me, Dad, this isn't a half-bad sport. We were paying users fees of $250 back then. They'd gone up a little. So I looked at the coach, I said, how much of my $250 users fee is going to his track and how much is going to his social life? And he looks at me and says, Bob, probably about 90% to his social life. So there he is, happily chatting away with these 6 freshman girls, Ashley and Caitlin and Olivia and Holman. So, every now and then, you hear Bigelow, and he runs over to the high jump pit. Bigelow runs over to long jump. Bigelow runs over to the hurdles. They had him doing some stuff. So we competed, and that was fun. So I didn't see all the meets because of my work. And I was on the road, and one morning I woke up, and Steven had been to his track banquet the night before. And he said, Dad, we had our track banquet. And most of the time he just grunts at me. And said, guess what I got at the track banquet? I said, I have no idea. He said, I got a letter. I didn't even know they had letters anymore. They had letters, big W. Great, you got a W, you got a W. I said, great, Steven, why'd you get it? Because I came in 3rd in a hurdle race sometime, and if you come in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in any event, in any track meet during the spring, you get a letter. He had a letter. And for the first time in his sporting career, all of 14 years old, I saw that little glint in his eye. He had earned something, a letter. The big W. I still have a few of my own, I think, up in the attic. So, sophomore year, quits basketball. Never really liked it anyways. Loves soccer. Continues with that. Makes the varsity junior, senior year on a very good soccer team, and was a good player. Not great, but good. And the track continues in the spring. Nothing great yet, but he seems to be taking a little more interest. Senior year comes around, and for the first time he does indoor track in the winter. First time he ever did it. Does indoor track. Comes home in December, a couple weeks into practice. He said, Dad, guess what? I am the league preseason high jump champ. And he's saying this rather proudly. So I go to a few of his indoor meets, and every meet he seems to be winning the high jump and the hurdles. We get to the spring, he adds the triple jump. And every meet I go to, he seems to win the triple jump, the hurdles, and the high jump. Including beating a town next door, which I don't think they've beaten in a dual meet in like 25 years. So I'm thinking to myself, well, look at this kid. By now he's up to a rather robust 6 feet tall and about 50 pounds. So, we come to May, Memorial Day. It is the district track meet, and we are Division 2. And he ends up winning the hurdle race in District 2. But it's late May. He's already applied to schools. He's already got into schools, and he has decided to go to our state flagship university, UMass Amherst. He wins the race, and the next day, he gets a call from home, the UMass Amherst track coach. He said, Coach, I'm coming. I'm all yours. He got into school 2 months before. I'm yours. Freshman year, one of the greatest hurdlers in UMass history is a senior. Steven's a freshman. Steven gets cut. They don't need 2 hurdlers, they just need 1. He's cut. And I'm thinking to myself, my God, now he is going to learn how to smoke pot. So, he sticks with it. And he's mad. He got cut. Kid graduates, he's the man, sophomore year. That was 2 years ago. Well, this coming weekend, we'll be seeing, not the Temple kids, they changed conference, we'll be seeing the St. Joe's and LaSalle kids up at UMass Amherst for the A10s. The kid from George Mason beat him by 1/100th of a second for the gold in indoors. Steven's got him in his crosshairs. He wants that gold this weekend in the 110-meter hurdles. We'll see what happens. The next weekend after that are New England's, a harder meet. He came in 5th indoors. See if he can even top that outdoors. And then the weekend after, I'll be back down in this neighborhood at Princeton. That's the IC4As, where right now I think he's ranked in the top 25 of all the D1 kids from Washington up to New England. This is a kid I literally had to dump into track 7 years ago. A sport for nerds, according to him. Now he's into it. He's had some success. He's pretty damn good. And my wife, all 5'2" of her, and me, 6'7", look at this kid and said, where the hell did we ever get him? As he's cruising over those silly hurdles. But you know what? It goes back to what I've been saying for over 20 years. We let him have his fun. We let him find his passion. If you had told me 4 years ago when he left high school that he would be one of the best hurdlers in New England in the Northeast by the time he was graduating senior year, I would have said, yeah, right. I was just happy he made the damn team. But he picked it. He found something, a little niche, jumping over those stupid 42-inch things. He figured it out how to do it, and he does it pretty darn well. Have to give him credit. Now he loves it. Guess what? I kidded him last week. It's no longer a sport for nerds, is it? He remembered the line. He said, no, Dad, I was wrong at 14, but then again, I said probably a lot of things I regret at 14. Hey, he's finally growing up on me at age 21. The message here is not to tell you my lovely story. The message is broader. If you have kids and they like sports, and I'm sure they do, try to let them find a passion. And the passion may not be your passion. It is the toughest thing to sell to adults. There are niches out there everywhere. Not everybody's going to be a hurdler. By the way, anybody want to know the real late blooming sport in this country that everybody loves once they get into it?
Golf.
Got the river down there. Rowing. Boy, kids become rowers. And by the way, they never seem to row before they graduate from high school. Then they get into it. Anybody ever rowed here? What a great sport. Talk about making a strong body. It's unbelievable things they do. There's a lot of sports out there that we never seem to find for our kids because we seem to be wrapped up in those sports I mentioned earlier. The baseballs, the soccers, the community sports that we all tend to bubble up with. I sometimes tell American parents, expand your minds. Look for some niche ones. Even volleyball, which is getting kind of big. Badminton, things like that. Tennis, stuff that kids don't play much. Expose your kids, if you have the time and the money, to some other things. Some kids don't do well with team sports. We tend to force them in because it's socialization and that's all fine and good. Some kids are better off with individual sports. By the way, you know what I used to do with my boys when they were young? Anybody ever seen those plastic golf balls where you whack them hard and they go 20 feet? We'd have a golf club and those little plastic golf balls with the dimples, and we had a little crate, and we put it in the front yard, and my sons and I would just practice chipping. We could do that for an hour, just trying to chip the stupid ball into. One thing I found about kids of all ages, boys and girls, they love whacking things. It's kind of fun to whack a thing. Just beat the heck out of it. Plastic golf ball. These are the kind of things you could expose your kids to. It doesn't cost much, but it gives them a little insight and maybe outsight to something that they haven't really done. It's not a bad message I think I sell, but it's hard when you get so in the groove with one sport or two or three. It's often not a bad idea. What is the single best country in the world per capita for producing world-class athletes? Notice they say per capita. Volume, it's us. Per capita.
Australia.
Australia. Who said it? Been there? Do you know why? Why are they so good?
They seem to chill out.
Yeah, they do have a little different style of life down there. I've been there many times. But it's not that. And their capital, Canberra, halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, they have something called the AIS, the Australian Institute for Sport. Probably on the face of this globe, the single best sports research entity. You know what they do in Australia really well? They'll take a kid who by 16 or 17 is really national, maybe going on world class in a sport, and they may move him or her into a complete other sport. And you know what? 2 or 3 years later, they're world class in that sport. They've developed a whole lot of hours behind one, then they switch them, and all of a sudden they're world class at age 20 or 21, because they look at body types. I always get it mixed up, docs. Somatotypes, physi, what are they called? Phy, it's like P-H-Y, some stupid word. Physi, you guys know this. You guys are MPs. Anyways, they look at body types, and they figure, gee, maybe rowing would be good for this kid. Or maybe basket. You know, they do this kind of stuff. Australia per capita, best sport or best country in the world at producing world-class athletes. We do it on volume. They do it on science. Daily. By the way, guess what sport in Australia they don't do it well at all? It's the rogue sport. And this is one they had 35, 40, 45 years ago.
Rugby.
And they've lost it. Rugby, they're very good. Very good at rugby.
Soccer.
Tennis. Rod Laver, Yvonne Goolagong, John Newcomb, Margaret Court. Anybody recognize these names? Hall of Famers. In the 60s and 70s, Australia produced, like any country, better than any country in the world, world-class tennis players. Can anybody name a world-class tennis player from Australia now?
Good.
Huh?
Leighton
Hewitt, who's still hanging on, right? It's funny. I spoke to 300 Australian tennis coaches down there, and you talk about inviting ants to a picnic. I was the ants at their picnic. I told them exactly what they were doing wrong. They didn't want to hear it. You know what they're doing wrong? In all their states, there's 7 of them, New South Wales and Victoria and all these places, they have tennis tournaments. And guess when they start anointing champions? At what age? 10, not 6, that's Americans. 10, 12, 14. I said, great. So what do you do with the data once you've anointed your 12-year-old boy New South Wales tennis champion? I bet you're fawning and throwing all sorts of resources and coaching at him. And I looked at him and I said, the best kid in that tournament was probably number 17. I bet you're not throwing too many resources and coaching at that kid because they didn't even make it to the quarterfinals. That's the problem. Too early, too much. Anointing their future stars when they shouldn't be. You may not realize this. Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer, 2, if you haven't heard, very good tennis players, right, were on the junior ladder once, 17 and under, throughout the world. Anybody want to guess where Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal were when they were 17 years old on the 500 kid, 17 and under junior ladder, when they were that age, 10, 15 years ago? Rafael Nadal was in the 2 teens, 215. Roger Federer was like 265. This is when they were 17. Look what they've done. Anybody curious about what happened to the 210 kids before Rafael Nadal? Or the 260 before Roger Federer? They fell by the wayside. And by the way, this is tennis where kids are hitting balls coming out of the womb. I looked at the Australians. I said, what the hell is wrong with you guys? You know and I know that these kids, when they're 17, someone's got to be number 1 in the world or number 10. But it's meaningless. By the way, anybody want to guess? Top 100 juniors, 17 and under, when they become seniors, 18 and over, Serena Williams, all those guys, what percentage of the top 100, 17 and unders become top 100, 18 and overs in tennis? They got it and they know what to do with. 7%. 7. I looked at the Australians. What is wrong with you people? You think you could tell when they're 12, and the data is telling you something completely different. They refuse to believe me. I'm an American basketball guy. What the hell do I know about tennis? But what I do know is bodies mature. And bodies in sport mature later and later. Whether you want to disagree or agree or not, that's the way it is. You can throw them in all sorts of activities younger, but older is where it counts. Piaget was a great Swiss, what would you call it, child psychologist? Child behaviorist, right. There was another guy, Piaget's, who was one of his contemporaries.
Jenner?
Nah, Swiss. Another Swiss guy. By the way, greatest line of all time, as he was observing kids playing oboes and pianos when they were 6. And he observed them. Yeah, and they got better earlier. And then they'd flame out later. You know what the line was? My hockey player. Early ripe, early rot. Great line. Early ripe, early rot. We see it so much. We build up the expectations, we build up the hours, 10,000 or not, and then what do we expect? They're gonna waltz into world-class ability. God, I wish it was so easy. And by the way, you are looking at a former world-class basketball player who never played till 14. Am I an outlier? I'm not sure about that. Because once I got into puberty and started to play a little, I got better. I'm not sure playing at 12 or playing at 6 or playing in utero really would have helped my basketball ability. Probably not.